to everybody. Today we have for the Intangible Cultural Heritage Seminar organized by the UNESCO Chair on Intangible Cultural Heritage and Comparative Law of the University of Rome Unitelma Sapienza, Martín Andrade-Pérez. Martin is professor also of Intangible Cultural Heritage at the University Javeriana in Colombia, and he is a researcher of the Foundation Erigaie. He was member of the evaluation body of the Intangible Cultural Heritage UNESCO Convention, and he is an expert on these topics because he worked a lot with the Colombia government, and he was the editor of the several Intangible Cultural Heritage nominations coming from Colombia. I want to remember just the Fiesta de San Pacho that was presented 10 years ago by Colombia. We asked to Martin to speak about the intangible cultural heritage in Colombia and how intangible cultural heritage in Colombia is protected, is valorized, and which is the kind of this heritage in Colombia. So thank you very much, Martin, to be part of this seminar, and you have the floor. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you, Pierluigi. Hello, everybody. So I will present you some of our experiences in Colombia with the safeguarding of intangible cultural heritage, and I will talk about what happened in Colombia with some of our laws and some of our projects. But I would like to focus on some of the lessons we learned in the past almost 20 years implementing the Convention of Intangible Heritage in Colombia. So that's why my presentation is about the lessons of the implementation of the 2003 Convention in Colombia. So I will begin with a little presentation, a quick presentation of Colombia. It's, as you can see in the map, is in the north of South America. It's about 100 million of square kilometers, about almost 50 million inhabitants. It is divided in 32 departments, and we have many different ecosystems. We have the Amazon forest, the Caribbean coast, and the Pacific coast, which are very different from each other. We have also the mountains in the Andean region and the eastern plains, which are most similar about what we normally think about Venezuela. We share this landscape with Venezuela. It's a huge country with many different cultures and many different elements of intangible cultural heritage. The capital is Bogota, founded in 1538, and it's almost 8 million people. It's in the mountains, almost at 2,600 meters, divided in 20 districts. I am talking about this because I am going to talk about Bogota a little bit later. So we have been working on cultural heritage and intangible heritage for a while now. I will show you these key steps about the intangible cultural heritage in Colombia. Of course, as in many of our countries in the 30s, in the 40s, there's a lot of folklore and ethnographic studies and inventories, and the Ethnologic Institute in 41, then in 52, the National Institute of Anthropology, which became the National Institute of Anthropology and History in 1999. But the most important step, I would say, not only for intangible heritage, but for Colombia in the last 100 years, was the Constitution in Colombia in 1991, which recognizes Colombia as a multicultural and pluriethnic country. This is important for all the cultural laws and policies after the 1991 Constitution. In 1997, we have a new law of culture, new for the time, and the creation of the Ministry of Culture with the Heritage Division. So that was like the beginning of all these ideas, and Colombia was in all the discussions of the UNESCO conventions at the time. So in between 2001 and 2004, 2003, UNESCO's cultural sector did a pilot campaign on intangible cultural heritage. That was in 2001, 2 years before the convention, called Patrimonio Inmaterial Colombiano Demuestra Quién Eres, Show Who You Are, to raise awareness of the importance of intangible cultural heritage in Colombia. So that was a pilot to see what could be done on intangible heritage in many countries around the world, and Colombia was took as a pilot in South America. And in 2003 and 2005, after this campaign, which was very successful, two elements were proclaimed as masterpiece of the oral and intangible heritage of humanity, which was the program before the representative list. And in 2005, we have the first National Intangible Cultural Heritage Congress and the creation of a group on intangible cultural heritage at the Ministry of Culture. And in 2006, we have the ratification of the Convention of Intangible Cultural Heritage. So we have this background. With this background, in 2008 and 2009, we did a new heritage law and a decree with a long chapter about intangible cultural heritage. At that time, I worked at the Ministry of Culture. I worked there for 5 years. So I could work in the making of these laws, of these decrees, and of these policies, especially on the policy for the safeguarding of the intangible cultural heritage in Colombia in 2010. These are like the law of 2008, the decree in 2009, and the policy in 2010 were like the most important steps for the laws and the policies on intangible cultural heritage in Colombia. They put the ground for all what happened since then. So we also have some other policies. In 2012, Colombia made a specific policy for the knowledge, safeguarding, and promotion of traditional foods and nutrition in Colombia. And in 2018, a policy for the strengthening of the skills of craft of the cultural sector in Colombia. So it was mostly the traditional handicrafts and all these elements. And recently, in 2019, there's a new decree with an updating of the ICH procedures. What can be said about this? With this law, the law created and the policy and the decree created, we have 12 domains of intangible cultural heritage, not 5 as the convention. We created our own 12 domains. The law created a national and many regional representative lists with concrete criteria for inclusion of the elements on this list. And there is a compulsory safeguarding plan for the inscription on the list, which was created on the law of 2008. Also, the policy in 2010 established a national plan of action with 6 strategies, which is very important also for what has been done since then. There's no compulsory inventories in Colombia, but in 2019, a certification is created for those elements outside the list. So about the lessons, I will begin with the inventories in Colombia, or with the idea of the inventories in Colombia. My first lesson comes from a project we did in 2005, the Inventory of Intangible Cultural Heritage of the Huila department, one of the 32 departments in Colombia. It was the first ICH inventory in Colombia. We didn't have methodologies at the time, so we created a database at the Erigaie Foundation where I work. The universities or the communities were not very interested about intangible heritage, so we were helping to create like a new agenda on intangible heritage, trying to think about the methodologies for inventories, but for methodologies for safeguarding in general. We have a group of anthropologists and ethnographists who have been working on folklore, ethnology, ethnography. So we decided to see how to do this kind of inventories. Of course, when we went then, we realized that there was a lot of different practices and traditions of intangible heritage that were very important for the people, of course. So we began to see the diversity of this department, of this region, with many cultural spaces, cultural landscapes, agriculture, religious traditions, also for housing, for fishing, for transportation, for handicrafts, for food, for everything. So this was very useful to see that the 5 domains of the convention, of the 2003 conventions, which are oral traditions, performing art, social practices, knowledge and practices about nature and universe, and traditional craftsmanship, were not were also important, but they were like a point of departure for us, for Colombia to create 12 own domains. So the people could understand what was or what is intangible heritage. So if we took these domains of UNESCO, people was not going to understand so well, and it was not going to adapt to the necessities of Colombia. So for the law, for the decree and the policy, we created our own domains. We defined more than created our own domains. So we have these 12 domains, as you can see in the slide. It's not the same domains as the convention, but they were adapted for our context. For example, we have some domains related to culinary culture, to popular art. These domains, as you remember now, are policies for Colombia. We have policies for some of these specific domains. We have for example, a domain which is called traditional religious collective events, because in Colombia, these religious events are really, really important. So we thought that we needed a domain especially for that. That brings us to our next example. In 2012, at the Erigaie Foundation, we have also another project with the Ministry of Culture, already with the policies and already with the laws on intangible heritage. But at that time, we already had 19 intangible heritage inventories in Colombia of the different regions and from many cities. So the idea was to evaluate and to analyze these inventories. What was the idea of these inventories? To know what we have before safeguarding. So we realized that many of these inventories didn't have a purpose. So they were not used or updated. Many of them were done in 2006, 2008, and after 2 years, they were not used. So because they didn't have a purpose. Some of them have a goal, so they were being used. A goal of divulgation or for specific safeguarding measures. And we also realized that the methodologies and the fields are different depending on the goal and on the purpose of the inventories. There was not the same inventory for an education purpose or to raise awareness, or the methodologies are different if it is for promotion or for a safeguarding plan, etc. So in Colombia, there's not a national inventory, but many inventories of departments, towns, and different subjects, different topics. That's important because, and we have been having this discussion many times, why Colombia doesn't have an inventory, because we have the list and because we have some other measures that are really, really important for the safeguarding of intangible heritage in Colombia. Then in the same year, we realized, for example, that there was a lot of Holy Weeks in Colombia. Holy Weeks that wanted to be part of the representative list. For example, we have the Holy Week processions in Popayán that were inscribed on the representative list of humanity in 2009. But at the time, the Ministry of Culture had at least 9 other Holy Weeks files for the national representative list. So the first step was to think or to do an inventory of the Holy Weeks. But in Colombia, there's more than 700 different Holy Weeks celebrations. So did we have to include all of them on the national inventory or on an inventory of the Holy Weeks? So we had these many questions about inventories. How to define the scale and scope of an inventory? What to include then? The most important elements, and which are the most important elements? Or only what the communities want to include? But what if some scholars want to include or think it is important to include some elements? Does it have an end in inventory? And if it doesn't, does the state have to pay eternally for it? Have to update an inventory with the same communities and groups? So we had all these questions, and we of course had a lot of workshops with the Ministry of Culture to think about inventories and the importance of them. Of course, we didn't have answers for these questions, so Colombia doesn't have a national inventory right now. But at the time, we had a purpose, so we decided to include the Holy Weeks with open files and with previous research. So with this, we created some valuation criteria for the representative lists, for not for the national only, but also for the regional representative list, or for none of them, because sometimes maybe a Holy Week doesn't have to be included on the representative list. Only they need some safeguarding measures. So that was one of our lessons from the inventories, from this example of the inventory of the Holy Weeks. But we have another example. The Erigaie Foundation didn't work on the inventory of Bogota in 2007. It was another organization, but this organization had the challenge of doing the inventory of intangible heritage of Bogota, which is an 8 million inhabitant city. It's very big. So they didn't know what to do because it's huge, and every neighborhood of the country, every community, there's a lot of intangible heritage. So they decided to define one element for each of the 20 districts to do some kind of a representative inventory of the city. But some of the districts can have almost 1 million inhabitants and 200 neighborhoods, which is also huge. It's like a city and not a little city. So the elements were defined on workshops with members of the communities. What they found that the communities in these districts decided to have, for example, a football championship as their most important intangible heritage for the inventory, or a flea market, or a tannery, which is very complicated because a tannery sometimes is not very good for the environment. Also, a traditional cafe in the city center was included on the inventory. But so people were deciding to do that, but it was sometimes very difficult because in another district, the biggest district of Bogota, they decided to include hip hop. That hip hop was going to be their element on the inventory of intangible heritage in Bogota. So we had many lessons about that. How many people represent the community or a group for these purposes? Why is it more important what the majority thinks? How to reach agreements between the majority and minority for intangible heritage? And if 10 people recognizes an element as part of their intangible heritage, and if they are not from the neighborhood, but they do there all their life, and if the newcomers or the tourists or the authorities don't like what is being inscribed on the inventories. So with all these questions, it was different, because at the end, nobody knew if everything can be intangible heritage. What was the border at the time? Only the old practices? What about these new cultural global urban practices like hip hop or like urban art that are from everywhere? So these are these were our challenges with inventories at the time. And it was really nice just to think about the concept of intangible heritage, for safeguarding the intangible heritage. And that put Colombia at the time like in some kind of avant-garde of the policies on intangible heritage in South America. So many other countries in South America were coming, people coming to see what we were doing at the time with intangible heritage, how we were thinking the inventories, how we were thinking many other things. The other lessons are about the representative list that was created in 2008. So, to include the list, an element must propose a very strict safeguarding plan, not only safeguarding measures as in the representative list of intangible heritage of UNESCO. And this safeguarding plan must last at least 5 years. So today there's 23 elements on the national list after 14 years, and not all the regions of Colombia have elements on their list. We have to establish some criteria, 6 criteria. They are different to the criteria of the UNESCO representative list. It has to correspond with the domains of intangible heritage, of course, but it has to have social significance, collective identity and nature, validity, which is in Spanish is vigencia, so that means that the element is alive, basically. Equity, so that everybody can access the element in the same way. And responsibility. Responsibility is more about human rights, but also the rights of nature, of animals, and to protect the environment. And this safeguarding plan, sometimes it's a very strong document with many measures for different risks, threats, and for transmission, for ensuring visibility and awareness, for improving knowledge and research on the element, and also for monitoring. So it's a very strong safeguarding plan. So it's not easy for these elements to be included on the representative list. This safeguarding plan sometimes are very documents of 200 pages with 3 or 4 years behind. So we also had, after these 12 years and these elements on the representative list of intangible heritage in Colombia, we had also these kind of questions. What is representative and what is not? And what does it represent? Intangible heritage, the countries of the world, the regions of Colombia, because we wanted to have a representative list representing the regions of Colombia. But it is not easy. They don't want sometimes to be on the representative list. Sometimes it's not about the regions, but about the communities, because in many regions we have different communities. And sometimes it's not even communities, but many little groups around Colombia. So we have that question, if can one element or 10 represent one country? And we still have that question. So in Colombia, we keep trying to improve the policies on intangible heritage. So, and the last question was, of course, maybe not the last, but why do we inscribe an element on a representative list, which was about the importance of intangible heritage? What for? To ensure better visibility of the intangible cultural heritage? Do the elements need to be on the list to ensure the visibility of the element? And do the elements need always the intervention of the state? So we had all these kind of questions, and the last real question, which was the most important for us, and that was the idea of creating a strong safeguarding plan, was to know what happens after the inscription on a list. Can the element change after its inscription on a list? Does the element receive more attention after its inscription on the list? In many cases in Colombia, it does. But some other cases are more difficult. But now we think that with these 23 elements on the representative list of Colombia, it has been like a good improvement of what is happening with intangible heritage in Colombia. That's it. I could talk much more about Colombia, but I will finish here with this last slide. And thank you very much for being with me and for your attention on the intangible heritage of Colombia. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Martin, because what you say, I think it's very interesting, and you put on the table a lot of questions, and we have to continue to discuss about this question, because it's not only related to the Colombian case, but all the country that was involved in the implementation of the 2003 Convention. So thank you very much for your speech, for your be part of this seminar. Thank you very much.